The small white pill sat in my palm like a tiny accusation as Aunt Victoria watched me with those sharp green eyes that had intimidated me since childhood. "Take it, Cassandra," she insisted, her voice carrying that familiar tone of authority that brooked no argument. "Your seasonal allergies are getting worse, and this will help. Trust me, I know what's best." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at the unmarked capsule, feeling the weight of her expectation pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Around the dinner table, my cousins Delilah and Miranda exchanged those knowing looks that had become so familiar over the years, the silent communication that said, "Poor Cassie, always the sick one, always the burden." "What exactly is it?" I asked quietly, turning the pill over in my fingers. The surface was smooth, professional-looking, but there was no imprint, no manufacturer's mark, nothing that would identify what I was about to put into my body. Aunt Victoria's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively. "It's a specialized antihistamine compound, much stronger than anything you can get over the counter. Dr. Pemberton prescribed it specifically for your condition." She leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the chandelier. "You know how much I care about your health, sweetheart. I've been researching treatments for months." Uncle Richard nodded approvingly from his seat at the head of the table. "Your aunt has connections in the pharmaceutical industry that most people would kill for. She's saved us thousands on medications over the years." He gestured toward a small pharmacy's worth of bottles lined up on the kitchen counter. All legitimate, all effective, all at a fraction of the retail cost. I glanced at those bottles, each one bearing Aunt Victoria's careful handwriting instead of printed pharmacy labels. She'd been supplying the entire family with various medications for as long as I could remember, always with the same confident assurance that she knew better than any doctor or pharmacist. "Cassie's always been so skeptical," Delilah chimed in, her voice dripping with the same condescension she'd perfected since we were children. "Remember when she refused to take those vitamins Aunt Vic brought back from Switzerland? She missed out on months of improved energy because she was being paranoid." Miranda nodded sagely. "Some people just don't understand that natural compounds work differently than synthetic ones. This isn't some mass-produced garbage from a chain pharmacy, Cass. This is personalized medicine." I felt the familiar flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. They always made me feel like the difficult one, the ungrateful niece who questioned every kindness, every gesture of care. But something about this particular pill bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. Maybe it was the way Aunt Victoria's eyes never quite met mine when she talked about Dr. Pemberton, or how she seemed unusually insistent that I take it immediately rather than waiting until I got home. "I appreciate it, Aunt Vic, I really do," I said carefully, slipping the pill into my jacket pocket. "But I'd like to research the active ingredients first. You know how sensitive I am to new medications." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Aunt Victoria's expression shifted from maternal concern to something harder, more calculating. "Cassandra, dear, you're not a pharmacist. You're not even in the medical field. Sometimes you need to trust the people who actually know what they're talking about." "She works at an insurance company," Miranda added with a laugh. "Processing claims forms doesn't make you qualified to second-guess actual medical professionals." Uncle Richard set down his wine glass with more force than necessary. "Victoria has been helping people in this family manage their health issues for 15 years. She's never steered anyone wrong. Your grandmother's arthritis, your cousin Jake's anxiety, your mother's thyroid condition, all managed beautifully thanks to Victoria's expertise and connections." I nodded politely, but something nagged at me. My mother's thyroid condition had never been officially diagnosed by an endocrinologist. In fact, when I'd suggested she see a specialist last year, Aunt Victoria had quickly dismissed it as unnecessary, claiming that the symptoms were obvious and that specialists were just trying to run up medical bills. "Of course," I murmured, forcing a smile. "I'm sure you're right. I'll take it when I get home tonight." Aunt Victoria's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Actually, it works best on an empty stomach, and you haven't eaten much dinner. Why don't you take it now? I'd feel better knowing you started the treatment properly. There it was again, that insistence, that subtle pressure that made me feel like a rebellious teenager instead of a 28-year-old woman with a master's degree in biochemistry, a detail about my education that my family conveniently forgot whenever it suited them. They saw me as Cassie, the insurance clerk, not Dr. Cassandra Chen, who spent her days analyzing pharmaceutical patents and drug interaction reports for a major medical malpractice firm. I really prefer to take new medications at home, I said firmly. That way, if there are any side effects, I'm in a comfortable environment. The silence that followed was deafening. Delilah and Miranda exchanged another one of their looks, this one laden with disapproval and pity. Uncle Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Aunt Victoria's fingers drummed against the mahogany table in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained frustration. Side effects, she repeated slowly, as if the words tasted bitter. Cassandra, this is an antihistamine, not chemotherapy. The worst thing that might happen is you feel a little drowsy. Then there's no harm in waiting until tonight, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Aunt Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Fine, but don't come crying to me when you're miserable with allergies for the next few days because you were too stubborn to accept help when it was offered. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by pointed comments about people who couldn't appreciate family generosity and the challenges of helping someone who didn't want to be helped. I ate my roasted chicken and asparagus while mentally cataloging every detail about the mysterious pill in my pocket. As I prepared to leave, Aunt Victoria pulled me aside in the foyer, her hand gripping my arm just a little too tightly. Cassie, sweetheart, I want you to understand something. That medication isn't easy to obtain. Dr. Pemberton did me a special favor by prescribing it off-label. If you decide you don't want it, please bring it back to me rather than throwing it away. It's quite valuable. I nodded, noting how her grip tightened when she mentioned its value. Of course, Aunt Vic, I wouldn't want to waste it. She studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to read something there. Good. And Cassie? This conversation should probably stay between us. Dr. Pemberton's practice is very exclusive, and he doesn't like his patient information being discussed casually. The drive home through the winding hills of Marin County gave me time to think. 23 years of family dinners, 23 years of Aunt Victoria's helpful medications and treatments, 23 years of feeling like the difficult one for asking questions that everyone else seemed perfectly comfortable not asking. But tonight felt different. Tonight, for the first time, I had the knowledge and resources to find answers. The pill sat on my kitchen counter under the bright LED lights, looking innocuous and professional. I photographed it from multiple angles, noting its size, color, and the complete absence of any identifying marks. In my home office, I pulled out the portable spectrometer I'd borrowed from work, officially for a research project, but I'd been curious about some of the supplements my family had been taking for months. As I powered up the equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would change everything.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The machine hummed to life, its blue display casting eerie shadows across my desk. I thought about Aunt Victoria's insistence, her tight grip on my arm, her warning about keeping our conversation private. For the first time in my adult life, I was about to test one of her miracle cures, and something told me that what I discovered would explain why she'd worked so hard to keep me from asking questions all these years. The spectrometer's results glowed on my computer screen at 3 in the morning, and I had to read them twice before the implications fully sank in. The pill contained no antihistamine whatsoever. Instead, the compound profile showed a cocktail of mild sedatives, muscle relaxants, and something that made my blood run cold, a low-dose antipsychotic typically used to treat severe mental illness. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the chemical breakdown that painted a disturbing picture. This wasn't allergy medicine. This was a pharmaceutical cocktail designed to make someone compliant, drowsy, and mentally foggy. I pulled up my pharmaceutical database and cross-referenced the exact dosages. Taken regularly, these compounds would create a dependency while gradually undermining cognitive function. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Dr. Sarah Martinez, a former colleague from graduate school who now worked in toxicology at UCSF. Even at this ungodly hour, I knew she'd want to see this. Sarah, it's Cassandra Chen. I need you to verify something urgent, and I need you to do it off the books. Cass? Jesus, it's 3 a.m. Are you okay? I photographed the spectrometer results and sent them to her secure email. I need you to tell me I'm wrong about what I'm seeing here. The line went quiet for several minutes while she accessed her computer. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from sleepy confusion to sharp professional concern. Where did you get this compound? And please tell me you didn't ingest it. My aunt gave it to me. She said it was specialized allergy medication from her doctor. Cassie, this is serious. This combination is sometimes used in psychiatric facilities for patients with severe behavioral issues, but never at these dosages, and certainly never without informed consent and medical supervision. Long-term use could cause permanent neurological damage. The room felt like it was spinning. How long-term are we talking? Months, maybe a year of regular use before you'd see irreversible effects. But even short-term, this would make someone extremely vulnerable to manipulation and poor decision-making. It's essentially a chemical lobotomy in pill form. I thought about my mother's increasing passivity over the past 2 years, how she'd stopped questioning Aunt Victoria's advice about everything from finances to medical decisions. I thought about my cousin Jake's sudden personality change after starting his anxiety medication, how he'd become withdrawn and dependent on the family for even basic decisions. Sarah, I need you to test something else. Can you analyze hair samples for long-term drug exposure? Of course, but Cass, if what you're implying is true, we're talking about systematic poisoning. You need to call the police. Not yet. I need proof first, real proof that will stand up in court. After hanging up with Sarah, I spent the rest of the night researching Dr. Pemberton, the physician Aunt Victoria claimed had prescribed the mystery pill. According to the California Medical Board database, no Dr. Pemberton held an active license in the state. I expanded my search nationally and found 3 Dr. Pembertons, but none specialized in allergy treatment, and none had practices that would explain how my aunt had access to their prescription pads. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to my mother's house in Sausalito. She answered the door looking pale and confused, moving with the slow, deliberate steps I'd attributed to her getting older, but now recognized as signs of pharmaceutical impairment. Cassie, what a surprise. Is everything all right? I hugged her, noting how frail she felt in my arms. Mom, I wanted to ask you about the thyroid medication Aunt Victoria has been giving you. How long have you been taking it? Her brow furrowed, as if the question required enormous effort to process. Oh, about 18 months now, I think. Maybe longer. Victoria handles all that for me. She's so good with medical things. Have you seen an actual doctor about your thyroid? Had blood work done? Mom's expression grew vaguely distressed. Victoria says doctors just want to run expensive tests for things she can manage with natural remedies. She studied pharmacy in college, you know. This was news to me. According to family lore, Aunt Victoria had dropped out of community college after 1 semester to marry Uncle Richard. Mom, can I see the pills she's been giving you? She shuffled to the kitchen and returned with a pill organizer filled with various unmarked capsules and tablets. Victoria fills this for me every week. She's so thoughtful. I don't know what I'd do without her help. I photographed the contents, my heart sinking as I recognized several of the pills as variations of what she'd tried to give me. Mom, when was the last time you made a major decision without asking Victoria's opinion first? The questions seemed to agitate her. I don't understand why you're asking all these questions. Victoria only wants to help. She's family. I spent another hour with my mother, documenting her symptoms and collecting hair samples under the pretense of helping her style her hair. The woman who had once been a sharp-witted high school principal now struggled to follow simple conversations and seemed genuinely confused about basic aspects of her own life. My next stop was my cousin Jake's apartment in Oakland. I found him in a condition that was even more disturbing than my mother's. Once an ambitious software engineer, he now spent his days playing video games and living off disability payments that Aunt Victoria had helped him obtain. Jake, how are you feeling these days?
He looked up from his computer screen with unfocused eyes. I'm okay, I guess. The anxiety medicine helps, but sometimes I feel really weird, like my thoughts are moving through mud. What anxiety medicine? The stuff Aunt Vic gets from her doctor friend. She says it's better than the garbage they give you at regular pharmacies. He gestured toward a collection of unmarked bottles on his coffee table. She brings me a month's supply every few weeks. I felt sick as I realized the scope of what was happening. Jake, before you started taking that medication, did you really have anxiety problems? He paused his game and turned to look at me with an expression that briefly flickered with something resembling his old self. You know, that's weird. I've been wondering about that lately.
I remember being stressed about work deadlines and stuff, but I don't remember having actual panic attacks until after I started the pills. But Aunt Vic says anxiety can be progressive, that it gets worse if you don't treat it properly. Have you ever tried stopping the medication? Once, for about 3 days, I felt horrible, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Aunt Vic said that proved how much I needed it, that my brain chemistry was too messed up to function without pharmaceutical support. I recognized the symptoms he described as classic withdrawal from psychiatric medications. Aunt Victoria hadn't just been drugging family members, she'd been creating dependencies that made them reliant on her continued treatment. That afternoon, I drove to the address listed for Dr. Pemberton's practice, according to the prescription bottles I'd photographed. It turned out to be a UPS store in a strip mall in San Rafael. The elderly clerk behind the counter confirmed that no doctor had ever rented a mailbox there, though someone had been using the address for mail forwarding services for several years. Yeah, a well-dressed lady comes in every few weeks to pick up packages, he told me. Always pays cash, never gives a name, real secretive type. I showed him Aunt Victoria's photograph from my phone. His eyes lit up with recognition. That's her, always very particular about her packages, always in a hurry. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Aunt Victoria wasn't getting medications from any doctor. She was ordering pharmaceutical compounds online, probably from overseas manufacturers that didn't require prescriptions. She was then repackaging them and distributing them to family members under the guise of personalized medical care. But why? What did she gain from keeping her own family members in a chemically induced fog? The answer came to me as I sat in my car outside the UPS store, thinking about the changes in family dynamics over the past few years. My mother had recently signed over power of attorney for her finances to Aunt Victoria, claiming she was too confused by financial matters to handle them herself. Jake had moved back in with his parents and was completely dependent on them for housing and support. Even my cousins, Delilah and Miranda, had become increasingly deferential to their mother, rarely questioning her decisions or showing any independent judgment. Aunt Victoria wasn't just playing doctor, she was systematically undermining the cognitive abilities of family members to maintain control over them. And last night, I'd almost become her next victim. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Hair sample results are in. Call me immediately. I knew before I answered what she was going to tell me, but hearing it confirmed still made my knees weak. Cass, whoever's been giving your mother these drugs has been poisoning her systematically for at least 2 years. The concentrations suggest daily dosing. This is attempted murder, or at minimum, aggravated assault. You need to call the authorities right now. But I wasn't ready to make that call yet. I needed to understand the full scope of Aunt Victoria's operation, and I needed evidence that would be impossible for her to explain away, because I knew that when I finally confronted her, she wouldn't go down without a fight. 3 weeks later, I walked into the quarterly family gathering at Aunt Victoria's house carrying a briefcase that contained enough evidence to destroy her carefully constructed facade forever. The dining room looked exactly as it had during that fateful dinner when she'd first tried to drug me, but this time I wasn't the naive woman who'd meekly accepted condescension and manipulation. "Cassandra, darling," Aunt Victoria greeted me with her practiced smile, though I noticed her eyes immediately went to the briefcase in my hand. "How wonderful that you could make it. I was worried you might still be feeling under the weather."
I'd spent the past 3 weeks playing the part of the compliant niece, returning her calls and even asking for more of the allergy medication to maintain her trust while I gathered evidence. Actually, I'm feeling much better. That medicine you gave me really helped. Her smile became more genuine, and I felt a chill at how pleased she looked at what she believed was confirmation of my chemical subjugation. I'm so glad, sweetheart. I have your refill ready whenever you need it. Around the table, my family members sat in various states of pharmaceutical fog. My mother looked more confused than ever, frequently losing track of conversations mid-sentence. Jake appeared listless and dependent, asking Aunt Victoria's opinion on everything, from what to eat to whether he should answer his phone. Even Uncle Richard seemed more subdued than usual, though I suspected his dosage was different since Victoria still needed him functional enough to manage their finances. Actually, I said, setting my briefcase on the table with deliberate ceremony, I wanted to talk to everyone about something important tonight. It's about our family's healthcare arrangements. Aunt Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Oh, what about them? I opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Well, I've been doing some research into the medications you've been providing for everyone, and I discovered some interesting discrepancies. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Delilah and Miranda exchanged confused glances, while Uncle Richard frowned at the papers I was spreading across the table. Discrepancies? Aunt Victoria's voice was carefully controlled, but I caught the slight tremor that betrayed her anxiety. I pulled out the first set of documents. Let's start with Dr. Pemberton, the physician you claim has been prescribing all these specialized treatments. I placed a copy of the California Medical Board records in front of her. Interesting thing about Dr. Pemberton, he doesn't exist, at least not as a licensed physician in California or anywhere else in the United States. Uncle Richard leaned forward, squinting at the documents. What are you talking about, Cassie? Victoria has been seeing Dr. Pemberton for years. Has she, Uncle Richard? Because according to these postal records, the address she's been using for his practice is actually a UPS store mail forwarding service. I placed the next set of documents on the table. The same UPS store where the clerk identified Aunt Victoria as the woman who's been picking up unmarked packages for the past 3 years. Aunt Victoria's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. Cassandra, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but these accusations are ridiculous. You're obviously having some kind of breakdown. Am I? I pulled out the spectrometer results and placed them directly in front of her. Because according to this chemical analysis, the allergy medication you gave me contains no antihistamines whatsoever. Instead, it's a cocktail of sedatives, muscle relaxants, and antipsychotic drugs. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother stared at the papers with growing confusion, while Jake's expression began to clear, as if a fog was lifting from his mind. That's impossible, Delilah stammered. Mom would never. Wouldn't she? I interrupted, pulling out more documents. Let's talk about Mom's thyroid medication, shall we? I placed Sarah's toxicology report in front of my mother. According to this hair analysis, you've been systematically poisoned with psychiatric drugs for over 2 years, the same drugs that are used in mental institutions to keep violent patients sedated. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with shock and growing understanding.
Victoria, what is she talking about? But Aunt Victoria was no longer listening to my mother. Her attention was fixed on me with an intensity that was almost predatory. You little bitch, she hissed, all pretense of maternal concern evaporating. Do you have any idea what you've done? The mask had finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator underneath. Uncle Richard stared at his wife in shock, while my cousins recoiled from their mother as if seeing her clearly for the first time. What I've done? I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Let me tell you what you've done, Aunt Victoria. You've been systematically drugging your own family members to keep them dependent and compliant. You've stolen their autonomy, their cognitive function, and in my mother's case, their financial independence. I pulled out another set of documents. Speaking of which, let's discuss the power of attorney papers Mom signed while under the influence of your chemical cocktails. Papers that gave you complete control over her finances, her property, and her medical decisions. My mother gasped, her hand trembling as she reached for the documents. I don't remember signing these. I mean, I remember signing something, but I was so confused that day. Of course you were confused, I said gently. You were heavily medicated with drugs designed to impair judgment and memory. It's a miracle you can remember anything from that period. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The anxiety medication, he said, his voice growing stronger and clearer than I'd heard it in months. She told me I'd die without it, that my brain chemistry was permanently damaged. Your brain chemistry is fine, Jake. What's damaged is your ability to trust your own perceptions after months of chemical manipulation. I turned back to Aunt Victoria, who sat rigid with fury. But here's what I find most interesting about your little operation. It's not just about money or control, is it? You genuinely enjoy it. You get off on being the family matriarch, the one everyone depends on for guidance and care. You don't understand anything, Aunt Victoria spat. This family was falling apart before I stepped in. Your mother was making terrible financial decisions. Jake was having panic attacks. Everyone was struggling. I provided stability. You provided chemical dependency, I corrected. You created the problems you claimed to be solving. Jake's panic attacks started after you began medicating him, not before. Mom's cognitive decline coincided exactly with when you started managing her health care. I pulled out the final document, the one I'd been saving for maximum impact. But here's the beautiful irony, Aunt Victoria. While you were so busy playing puppet master with everyone else's brain chemistry, you made one critical mistake. Her eyes narrowed. What mistake? You assumed I was just another victim. You assumed I was the same compliant little girl who used to be intimidated by your authority. I placed my business card on the table, the one that clearly identified me as Dr. Cassandra Chen, Senior Pharmaceutical Analyst at Hartwell Medical Consulting. You forgot that I actually have the education and resources to figure out what you were doing. The color drained completely from her face as she read my credentials. Uncle Richard stared at the card in confusion. You're a doctor, but you work in insurance. I work for a medical malpractice firm, Uncle Richard. I analyze pharmaceutical cases and drug interactions for a living. It's literally my job to identify when medications are being used inappropriately or illegally. Aunt Victoria's hands were shaking now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine. Actually, I can prove everything. I gestured to the mountain of evidence spread across the table. Chemical analyses, postal records, medical board documentation, toxicology reports, financial records showing the suspicious timing of legal documents. Oh, and the best part? I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Audio recordings of our conversations where you explicitly admit to providing unmarked medications from a non-existent doctor. Turns out, California is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. The room erupted in chaos as my family members began to understand the full scope of what had been done to them. My mother was crying, Jake was pacing and muttering about lost time, and my cousins were staring at their mother with expressions of horror and betrayal. But I only watched Aunt Victoria, who sat frozen in her chair like a chess player who just realized she was in checkmate. The woman who had controlled and manipulated her family for years was finally seeing her victims regain their clarity and turn against her. The police are already involved, I said quietly, so only she could hear. Detective Morrison is very interested in discussing your pharmaceutical operation. Turns out, systematic poisoning of family members is taken quite seriously by law enforcement. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear there instead of condescension. Cassie, please, we're family. Surely we can work something out. I stood up and snapped my briefcase closed. You're right, Aunt Victoria. We are family. That's what makes what you did so unforgivable. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me. Cassie, wait. What happens now? I turned back to my family, my real family, the people who were finally free to think clearly and make their own decisions for the first time in years. Now you heal, Mom. Now you all take back control of your lives. And now Aunt Victoria learns that the people she tried to turn into puppets are actually stronger than she ever imagined. The last thing I heard as I left was the sound of Aunt Victoria's world crumbling around her. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely again. 6 months later, I sat in the witness stand of the San Francisco Superior Court, watching Aunt Victoria's defense attorney make his final desperate attempt to discredit my testimony. The woman who had once commanded such authority over our family now looked diminished in her orange jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair replaced by a regulation ponytail, her designer jewelry traded for handcuffs. Dr. Chen, the defense attorney said, his tone dripping with manufactured skepticism, "Isn't it true that you had a personal vendetta against my client? That you were motivated by jealousy over her successful pharmaceutical connections?" I looked directly at Aunt Victoria as I answered. I was motivated by the fact that she was systematically poisoning my family members for financial gain and psychological control. If you want to call concern for my mother's welfare a vendetta, then yes, I suppose I had one. The prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Walsh, had built an airtight case using the evidence I'd gathered: 12 counts of elder abuse, 8 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, 6 counts of practicing medicine without a license, and 3 counts of fraud. The jury had heard testimony from toxicologists, seen the chemical analyses, and listened to the audio recordings where Victoria explicitly discussed her illegal pharmaceutical operation. "Your Honor," the defense attorney continued, "my client was simply trying to help her family members manage their health conditions in a cost-effective manner. She had no intention of causing harm." Judge Patricia Martinez looked unimpressed. "Counsel, your client administered controlled substances without medical supervision, created fraudulent prescriptions using a fictitious doctor, and systematically impaired the cognitive function of vulnerable family members while manipulating them into signing legal documents. The court finds it difficult to characterize these actions as helpful." From the gallery, I could see my mother sitting with Jake, both of them looking healthier and more alert than they had in years. The detoxification process had been challenging, requiring medical supervision as their bodies adjusted to functioning without the constant chemical interference. But gradually, their personalities had returned, along with their ability to think clearly and make independent decisions. Jake had been the most dramatic recovery. Within weeks of stopping Victoria's anxiety medication, his sharp intellect had reasserted itself. He'd not only returned to his software engineering career, but had also sued Victoria in civil court for the 2 years of lost income and professional opportunities her drugging had cost him. The settlement from that case had funded his new startup company, which was already showing promising results. My mother's recovery had been more gradual, but equally remarkable. As the psychiatric drugs left her system, she'd regained not just her cognitive clarity, but also her fierce independence. The power of attorney documents signed under chemical influence had been voided by the court, and she'd reclaimed control of her finances and property. More importantly, she'd regained confidence in her own judgment and decision-making abilities. "Dr. Chen," DA Walsh said during redirect examination, "can you explain to the jury the long-term effects your family members would have experienced if this poisoning had continued?" I turned to face the jury, seeing their rapt attention as I delivered my expert testimony. Prolonged exposure to these psychiatric drugs without medical supervision would have caused permanent neurological damage. We're talking about irreversible cognitive impairment, movement disorders similar to Parkinson's disease, and complete dependency on chemical management for basic emotional regulation. My aunt wasn't just controlling my family members, she was gradually destroying their capacity for independent thought and action. The defense attorney's cross-examination had been particularly brutal regarding my credentials and motivations, but I'd been prepared for every attack. My expertise in pharmaceutical analysis was unimpeachable, my documentation was thorough, and my testimony was backed by multiple independent experts who'd verified my findings. But the most damaging evidence hadn't come from my analysis at all. It had come from Victoria herself. During the investigation, police had searched her home and discovered a sophisticated pharmaceutical operation in her basement.
Industrial-grade pill presses, bulk quantities of controlled substances ordered from overseas suppliers, and most damning of all, detailed records of dosages and effects she'd been tracking for each family member. She'd been treating her relatives like laboratory subjects, carefully documenting their responses to different chemical combinations. The prosecutor had also uncovered the financial motive behind Victoria's scheme. Over the course of 3 years, she'd systematically drained nearly $400,000 from my mother's accounts, using her power of attorney to transfer funds to shell companies she controlled. She'd also manipulated Jake into signing over his inheritance from our grandfather, claiming he was too mentally unstable to manage the money responsibly. The defendant kept meticulous records, DA Walsh had told the jury during opening statements, records that show she was fully aware of what these drugs would do to her victims. This wasn't a misguided attempt to help, this was calculated predation of vulnerable family members. As the trial progressed, more family members came forward with their own stories. Cousin Delilah revealed that her mother had been secretly medicating her as well, using birth control pills laced with mood stabilizers to keep her compliant and dependent. Miranda admitted she'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid of her mother's retaliation to speak up. Even Uncle Richard, initially defensive of his wife, had eventually provided testimony against her when investigators discovered she'd been drugging him too, using a much lower dose designed to make him passive without affecting his ability to earn income. His loyalty to Victoria evaporated when he realized she'd been manipulating him just as thoroughly as everyone else. The most chilling revelation came from Victoria's personal journals, discovered during the search warrant execution. Page after page detailed her satisfaction at controlling family dynamics, her pleasure at being the indispensable matriarch everyone depended on, and her contempt for relatives she viewed as weak and easily manipulated. One entry, dated just 2 weeks before I'd exposed her, was particularly damning. Cassandra is becoming problematic. Need to increase her dosage and perhaps add something stronger. Her questions about family finances are becoming tiresome. Once she's properly medicated, she'll be much more manageable like the others. Reading those words in court had been surreal. To see my own systematic destruction planned out in Victoria's neat handwriting, to understand how close I'd come to losing my autonomy and cognitive function, had filled me with a cold fury that sustained me through months of legal proceedings. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Martinez sentenced Victoria to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 7 years. She also ordered full restitution to all victims and permanent prohibition from having any contact with family members. As the bailiff led Victoria away, she turned to look at me one last time. The woman who had once made me feel small and stupid with her condescending authority now looked exactly like what she was, a pathetic predator who'd built her sense of power by destroying the people who trusted her most. Outside the courthouse, reporters peppered me with questions about how I'd uncovered the scheme and what message I had for other families who might be facing similar situations. I thought carefully before answering, knowing that my words would be heard by people who might be experiencing their own doubts about suspicious family dynamics. Trust your instincts, I said into the cluster of microphones. If something feels wrong, investigate it. Don't let anyone make you feel foolish for asking questions about your own health care or for wanting to understand what medications you're taking. And remember that real family members who care about your well-being will welcome your questions, not discourage them. Dr. Martinez from UCSF, who'd become something of a mentor during the case, joined me for the press conference. This case highlights the importance of pharmaceutical literacy, she told the reporters. Everyone has the right to know exactly what medications they're taking and why. No one should ever accept unmarked pills from anyone, regardless of their relationship or claimed expertise. That evening, my mother hosted a celebration dinner at her house, the first family gathering she'd organized independently in over 3 years. Jake brought his new girlfriend, a brilliant biotech researcher who understood exactly what he'd survived. My cousins Delilah and Miranda attended with their own partners, both having recovered their confidence and independence once free from their mother's chemical control. As we sat around the table, I marveled at how different the atmosphere was from those tense dinners at Victoria's house. There was laughter, genuine conversation, and respectful disagreement when opinions differed. Most remarkably, there was trust, something Victoria's manipulation had nearly destroyed permanently. I keep thinking about all the warning signs we ignored, Jake said, shaking his head. The way she always insisted we take our pills immediately, how angry she got when anyone questioned her medical advice, the way she isolated us from outside doctors. She was very good at what she did, I replied. Psychological manipulation combined with chemical dependency is incredibly effective. The drugs made you doubt your own perceptions, while she positioned herself as the only reliable source of information. My mother raised her wine glass, her hands steady and her eyes clear. To Cassandra, for refusing to be another victim and for saving all of us from a future we can't even imagine. As we toasted, I thought about the dozens of letters I'd received from other families who'd recognized similar patterns in their own relatives after news coverage of the trial. 3 other criminal investigations had been opened based on information provided by people who'd seen Victoria's story and realized they might be facing similar situations. The Hartwell medical consulting firm where I worked had also established a new division specifically to investigate suspicious pharmaceutical cases in family settings, with me as the department head. We were already working on 12 cases across the country, helping families document evidence of medication abuse and connecting them with appropriate law enforcement resources. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the simplest one. 6 months after Victoria's sentencing, I sat in my mother's garden, watching her tend to roses she'd planted herself, something she'd been too chemically impaired to manage during the worst period of her poisoning. Her hands were sure and steady as she worked, her mind sharp and focused. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" she said, not looking up from her pruning. "It's not just getting my mind back. It's knowing that my daughter had the courage and expertise to fight for our family when we hadn't fight for ourselves." I smiled, thinking about that first dinner when Victoria had tried to make me take her mysterious pill. If I'd been anyone else, if I'd had any other career or educational background, her plan would have worked perfectly. I would have become just another compliant victim, gradually losing myself to chemical manipulation while she robbed me of my autonomy and independence. Instead, her greatest mistake had been underestimating the quiet woman she'd always dismissed as unimportant. The same arrogance that made her believe she could control everyone around her had blinded her to the one person in the family who had both the knowledge and resources to expose her completely. Sometimes the best revenge really is just being underestimated by the right person at exactly the right time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.